Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rahman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about the Afghan peace process. And we've also learned that Dr. Abdullah Abdullah is going to visit Pakistan soon. And we will be talking about the surging violence in Afghanistan. We'll be also throwing light on the Taliban violence that poses threat to peace. This is what Ashraf Ghani, the president, has said. And then the future of the intra-Afghan talks, spoilers in the Afghan peace process. Now, that is something very important, and we'll be talking about that as well. And one of the major bone of contention was about the release of the prisoners from both the sides, from the Taliban as well as from the Afghan government. Where exactly is that heading? We'll be also talking about that. And then the most important part, the role of Pakistan in the Afghan peace process. This is something which we'll be talking about in our today's program as well. And we've also learned that the Americans seem to be very keen regarding the withdrawal of their forces from the Afghan soil. And most likely that is going to happen soon. But what exactly is going to be the number that they're going to keep, that is still something we'll be talking about. Now, this is the detail of our today's program and the content. And let me also introduce you to the panelists which we have in our today's program. We have with us on Skype, we have with us Amina Khan. She is an Afghan affairs expert. Thank you very much, ma'am, for taking out your time and talking to PTV World. And we also have with us Dr. Hussain Shahid Suhrawardy Saab, foreign affairs expert. Suhrawardy Saab, thank you very much for talking to PTV. It's been a while, but I'm sure there is a lot more that we'll be learning from you in our today's program. And we'll also be talking to Air Vice Marshal retired Faiz Amir Saab in our program today. But let's start off from the lady, Amina Khan, who is an Afghan affairs expert. Ma'am, Assalamu alaikum once again. And now please tell us about a few very important developments. First of all, regarding the visit of Abdullah Abdullah, and also tell us about the context of his visit and when is he going to come?
Right. Well, thank you for having me. I think it's a bit too soon for us to celebrate his visit. So first of all, let me start with the appointment of Ambassador Sadiq. I think this was something that needed to be done. And while it's unfortunate that all the major stakeholders in Afghanistan have always had a special representative for Afghanistan, despite the fact that, we're so close, yet we've had such a strained relationship. We have never had this position before. So first of all, I think this is a very welcome development, and it is something that should have been done a long time ago. But the fact that it has taken place and now we have Ambassador Sadiq is something that I think Pakistan and the Afghan relationship will greatly benefit from. And I think we're seeing it just within a span of, I think, less than 2-3 weeks. Immense inroads have been made. And I think Ambassador Sadiq has been very instrumental in bridging the gap, which, by the way, is huge. And it's going to take, a lot of effort to bring these countries together, because there is a history of a strained relationship. Again, now that Abdullah Abdullah, finally the political feud has been settled between Abdullah Abdullah and President Ghani, and now that he's the head of the High Council for National Reconciliation, it is an important step, and it is an important development that he'll come to Pakistan, because I think it's no secret Pakistan has played an instrumental role in the peace process, whether it's publicly or privately, pushing the Afghan Taliban to enter into intra-Afghan talks, which, by the way, continues to be a major stumbling block in the way of peace. And this is what Pakistan is pushing for. And by the way, following I think Ambassador Sadiq's appointment, another important development took place, which was the visit of General Bajwa to Afghanistan, where he met the leadership, both President Ghani and Abdullah Abdullah, as well as others. And I think this is now setting the ground for, hopefully, the intra-Afghan talks. But as you mentioned in your introduction, the release of prisoners continues to be a major stumbling block. And as we've seen in the past, unfortunately, President Ghani has time and again, created hurdles. He's created eruptions in the way. And I think this remains a contentious issue. And unless and until they do not overcome the release of prisoners, which, by the way, is an essential requirement of the agreement that was signed between the Americans and the Taliban, which was you release prisoners. Once that process is complete, then you enter into intra-Afghan talks, which, if we go by that schedule, were meant to take place on March 10th. And here we are now in July. And still, the peace process remains quite elusive, because we don't know whether the talks will take place. But I know this much, that all regional countries are on board, as well as Qatar and other major stakeholders, and they are pushing, because at the end of the day, I think it's very important for us to realize that external actors, including the Americans, including Pakistan, can only do so much. Peace at the end of the day has to
All
be
right. At the
achieved
end of the day,
between the
it
Afghans
says
themselves.
supposed to be as we all say that it should be Afghan-led, Afghan-owned. Now that is something which everybody has been looking forward to, but unfortunately, we do understand the kind of pressures the Afghan government has at the moment. Moving on to you now, Hussain Saeed Saab. Now, when we hear that Mr. Mohammad Sadiq, who's been placed as a special representative of the Pakistan government, and we have heard that he is very close to even Abdullah Abdullah. He has this personal relationship with him. That is something also very significant and very important. Plus, he is also very well known and very welcomed by most of the Afghan leadership. So placing him there for this particular job to negotiate with the Afghan leaders and plus make sure that there should be a proper way forward for a meaningful dialogue, eventually resulting in a peaceful exit of the Americans and then a proper settlement within Afghanistan. Your take on that, Surwardi Saab?
Thank you very much, Rehman, for taking me on this subject, which is really of paramount importance for Pakistan, not only for Pakistan, but for entire region, of course, for vis-a-vis Afghanistan. Pakistan, for the first time, has taken this step that, and especially Envoy has been appointed, as Amna has stated. Now, this special invitation for special appointment is important because in this way we will be in a better position to clear all those misunderstandings that we normally do for positive energies, and Afghan administration takes it extremely negatively. So it is not only that our ambassador will be involved, but also a special envoy has been appointed. One. Second thing, we know that this time Afghan administration is very serious about resolution of internal issues, as well as reaching to a common point where they would be, they would like to have an end to a war and solution of the problem. Now, for that matter, it is very important that Dr. Abdullah, who is heading this reconciliation committee, there must be something very closely linked negotiations between the countries. And for that matter, Dr. Abdullah is coming over to Pakistan. I believe that before starting intra-Afghan dialogue, he is going to visit all those countries where they fear that all Afghan factions who are fighting, who are probably one way or the other supported, financed, or they have a soft corner, so that they may know what the other country is wanting in Afghanistan. And in the light of that, they would proceed further for a successful intra-Afghan dialogue. I believe Dr. Abdullah's visit to Pakistan, Ambassador Sadiq's appointment as a special envoy to Afghanistan are very important steps for achieving very pragmatic results vis-a-vis Afghan peace process.
All right, coming back to Amina now, Ghani has also been very concerned. He has warned that the violence by the Taliban primarily is very threatening to the country's peace process. And he also briefed the international community on Kabul's preparation for peace talks with the armed groups. Now, where exactly is that heading? Is it still the sort of strength the Taliban has whenever and wherever they want to strike, they strike? And they've been able to do a lot of damage on that part. But do you believe that now the Afghan government, after this election, now Abdullah Abdullah has been given a certain task where he's going to be the main person for the reconciliation, whereas when you talk about the president, Ashraf Ghani, he is still concerned about the ongoing current situation in Afghanistan. But obviously you can't clap with one hand. You need both your hands to create that kind of a noise. Currently, whom would you blame for the delay in the peace process? Primarily, let's also talk about the exchange of the prisoners. Is that the real issue, or there is something else brewing in the mind of the Afghan president?
Well, let me begin by just saying that President Ghani, unfortunately, has been known, as I mentioned before, to be a spoiler in the peace process. And we've seen this before as well, when he initially created hurdles, when they had to uh, put forth an inclusive team for intra-Afghan negotiations. This is, I'm talking about, even as early as last year. Apart from that, once the deal was signed, again, President Ghani unnecessarily, he added additional preconditions, and therefore it resulted in the delay of the release of prisoners. Now, we have to realize and understand that there is a lot of mistrust between the Afghan government and the Taliban. And this is not just limited to President Ghani. This existed even in Hamid Karzai's time. And here, I think an important factor that has always been missing from the Afghan equation has been the concepts of national and social reintegration and national and social healing. And that is why I say that the biggest hurdle to the peace process is, in fact, the Afghans themselves. They, the day they are willing to sit together, accommodate each other, and compromise with one another and accept each other, that is the day you'll be able to see major developments in the peace process. I mean, look, there are people openly within the government in Kabul that openly oppose the peace process, let alone do you think they're going to accommodate the Taliban and share power with them? So these are, again, questions that will only be answered and discussed and dwelled upon once intra-Afghan talks take place, if they ever do. Now, coming over to President Ghani, you know that it was the government of national unity, but that was only in black and white. It was the most dysfunctional government that, the Afghans have had post 2001, where, you would always have President Ghani undermining Abdullah and vice versa. So now that, a political compromise has been reached, we will only be able to see how far Abdullah can deliver if he's not undermined, if he's given full autonomy and independence to operate as the chairman of the High Council of National Reconciliation. And this means that President Ghani should not throw spanners in the works, which he does, and he's doing it currently right now, again with the release of prisoners. So the onus is on him. However, there is a big responsibility when it comes to the Afghan Taliban. Now, look, a major component of the peace agreement, I don't call it a peace agreement because it hasn't delivered peace, but the US-Taliban agreement was a ceasefire or a reduction in violence. Now, unfortunately, the Taliban's stance regarding the reduction of violence is very contradictory, to say the least. While following the clauses, they have stopped attacking international forces, they continue to attack Afghan forces. And this is, this is a non-starter. You cannot
they've been able to kill more than
that's what I'm coming
400
to that. Yes.
Afghans, I mean, kill and wound both put together.
Yes, I was
In 1
coming
week.
to that. The fact that, yes, and that's what I'm saying, that they can no longer justify their violence because they're not killing Americans, they're killing ordinary Afghans. And I'm sorry, but if you can accept the puppet master, why can you not accept the puppet government? So this stance of the Taliban is highly contradictory, and here the Taliban will have to reduce violence, and they will eventually
I'll take the same debate now to Air Vice Marshal Faiz Amir Saab, who's just joined us. Faiz Saab, Assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much for taking out your time and talking to PTV. Well, now the debate is going on. Number one, there are a couple of issues, Faiz Saab. One seems to be the major issue regarding the trust deficit, and then there seems to be some sort of a disengagement between the two main leaders, Abdullah and Ashraf Ghani. They were unable to do anything in the previous government, and now this time a lot of people are hoping that a lot is going to happen, but let's see where it leads. But currently the situation is that so when we talk about that the intra-Afghan dialogue is supposed to be held with the common support of the Taliban and the Afghan government, good, bad or ugly, that's a separate chapter. Do you see that taking place in the near future, sir? And if so, what sort of results do you expect out of it?
Hello, Faisal. Do you hear me?
I can hear you clearly, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Let's look at the stakeholders in this particular process of peace talks. United States, and there are too many stakeholders actually. There are too many participants in these talks. United States is in a hurry to leave. It's not really very concerned what happens, or it has not shown that concern. Why I said that? Because they agreed to a forces withdrawal before the intra-Afghan agreement could take place. So they are in a hurry to leave to meet the election deadline. There is an Afghan government which is politically weak, and if you now see, because of the February 29th agreement, in which there was an agreement between Afghanistan, Taliban and the Americans not to attack each other. cessation of operations against each other. That means the American military and mostly its air forces out of the fray. Now that leaves the lack of air support. That's a major factor has been a major factor in the war in Afghanistan. Now when you take that out, Afghanistan national security forces become very weak. So that's the dilemma of the present regime, that it relies on a force which is increasingly becoming weaker because of the lack of air cover. You see, if Taliban are buoyant. They have an upswing because they actually call what they call is that the Americans surrendered at Doha because they did not retrieve from any of their points, and Americans retrieved. So, and then there are others who are spoilers. There are other factions. There are Indians influenced. There are other neighbors who probably would like to have a pie. So when you come back to with this background, when you come down to the intra-Afghan dialogue, what you see is Taliban are no Democrats, and they do not believe in democracy. What I believe is that they probably would like to go back to their own ways of emirates that they had in 2001 and before that.
But this time, AVM Saab, that was I've asked a few concerned authorities, and they believe that this time the ideology of the Taliban, that's changed. I mean, that's not the one which we witnessed in 2001. Perhaps this is the new one after 20 years, in which women's rights would be there and a couple of other factors which matter would be considered as well.
No, the leopard may change its spots, but it doesn't change as a leopard. So what they have is are hardcore Taliban fighting for the last 30, 40 years. So what you have them, they may accept certain reforms, they may accept certain gender parity, but they are going to. Do you think they're going to accept the Ashraf Ghani government and Abdullah's part in their government for a very long time? Let me draw your attention to what happened in Vietnam in 1973. In 1973, when the American forces withdrew from Vietnam, before the implementation of the agreement, next 2 years, the North Vietnam took over the South Vietnam, and they just eliminated the South Vietnamese government. Now that is just the similarity you see here. That's why I told you in the beginning, I mentioned, that Americans are in a hurry to leave. They have to meet their deadline by major withdrawal by November and then by April 2021. So only one party which is not in a hurry to negotiate are Taliban.
All right. Let me take the same point to Hussain Sarwardi Saab. Let's see what he has to say. Maybe it seems that he is differing from your point of view. Sarwardi Saab.
Rehman, AVM Saab has given really numerous statements, and somehow I believe there can be another program on that, because one thing, let me go one by one. One thing, Taliban are not at all in that position at the moment, nor do they want to have an Emirates kind of Emirates-styled government in Afghanistan, because it's not possible. Afghanistan before 9/11 and of today is completely different picture. We cannot say that they would have once again the same Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan as they had once upon a time. Things have completely changed. Now with intra-Afghan dialogue that we say in Urdu, Bainul Afghan dialogue, Bainul Afghan Muzakarat, now that would be the time when they would have some give and take thing. So in give and take, they have to accept Dr. Abdullah, they have to accept Dr. Ghani, and they have to go for a coalition government. If for that matter, the Taliban, they have to accommodate with them, one thing. Second important thing, Americans are not in that hurry as AVM Saab is stating and he's urging upon. They are there. They do not want to spoil 20 years of their investment that they have done till now, which is $444 billion just development of Afghanistan. That too figure in till 2013, and I don't have the latest figure that they have spent on Afghanistan. So they are not in that hurry that they would spoil whatever they have spent in Afghanistan too. Number three important thing, the analogy that AVM Saab has presented, this Vietnam, oh no, that cannot be quoted here. It is completely different scenario, different region, different situation in as far as Americans are concerned. Americans were on run at that very time. They lost that war. Here, in this case, they won the war. They did what they wanted. They came here to arrest Osama bin Laden. They killed him. They wanted to break the backbone of the Al-Qaeda. They did it. They wanted to control Afghanistan. They did it. But finally, remember, since 9/11, they never stated Taliban were terrorists. They always stated that they are warriors, they said insurgents, and even recently they once again reiterated the same statement. So which means that dialogue was possible. For that matter, we cannot compare Afghanistan situation with Vietnam. Further to that, I believe this is the high time that Taliban must cooperate. Taliban at the moment are, there is once again a misunderstanding between the Afghan regime, which means Kabul regime, and the Taliban. Taliban say that they are fighting against their own insurgents, are fighting against the military of Afghanistan. On the other hand, Ashraf Ghani's government states that whatever terrorist activities against common man is taking place, that all is there at the hands of the Taliban. Whereas they say that there are certain spoilers who are filling the gap between the Taliban and Dr. Ashraf Ghani. And who are those spoilers? They are ISIS. So we don't know really what is the situation on ground. At the moment, what we can do is that they both must stop a misunderstanding. They must go to the negotiating table so that everything may go clear and Afghanistan may experience peace. There may not be a gap which may be filled by insurgent groups or terrorist groups like ISIS.
All right. AVM Saab, you would like to comment on what Surwardi Saab just said?
I respect his views. There's a lot of optimism in his views, and I really respect that. But if you recall the 29th February agreement, the Taliban insisted on writing their name as Emirate of Afghanistan.
Correct.
And which on the agreement, they wrote Emirates of Afghanistan, Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan, which the Americans in a hyphenated said which they don't agree to. But look at their insistence. Look at their insistence even at the table, that they insisted on their own flag, their own name of the country that they want to have, the state. That is one point. The second point is, if you look at the way the Americans have, although one wishes stability in Afghanistan because that is in our best interest, but the optimism has to be tainted with a bit of caution. Because what you see here is Abdullah being the head of the peace negotiating council is not totally under Mr. Ashraf Ghani. They have had a rancorous kind of a relationship throughout last 4 or 5 years. So what we see is that in this time, the Ashraf Ghani government is weaker than its previous terms. And you see, what they're relying on is, let's agree on one thing, that their strength is on the Afghanistan National Security Forces. And they need continuous funding to support those forces. Whereas Taliban do not need any such funding. Their people are fighting, and they've been fighting for the last 20 years for a cause. What you see in June, just in 1 week, there were over 422 attacks.
Yes.
There were over 400 Afghan National Security Forces were killed and 550 were wounded.
Correct.
The June was the worst month in the last 19 years. So what you see is an upsurge, and what you see is the determination by the Taliban to enter negotiations table with their own people, Afghan government, with a certain upper hand. And that is what they've been. And let me tell you, while the increase in violence is against the spirit of the February agreement, it is actually not against the agreement. Because agreement does not mention that there will be no violence, no war or no violence, or there will be a ceasefire between the Taliban and the Afghan government. So it may be against the spirit of the agreement, but it's not against the agreement itself. So Americans cannot push, and you can't expect the Taliban to agree to something which they have not signed on. So that is
All right.
and their strength remains in violence. As long as they can put the Ashraf Ghani government and Mr. Abdullah under pressure, they would have an upper
Taliban
hand.
can always challenge. They have been challenging, and in the future there's going to be a challenge if their demands are not met. But having said that, as you mentioned, that Ashraf Ghani is comparatively weaker what he was in the previous government, if you do the comparison. But Amina, now there's another point. Ghani says that if this fight or the retaliation or the attacks or the aggressiveness from the Taliban side continues, this is going to create a lot of problem in the peace process. Now, the Taliban believe that the problem is on the other side. The government of Afghanistan blames the Taliban for their aggressive approach, which is becoming a problem. But we haven't discussed one thing, and that is about the diminishing role or the eroding role of the Indians in Afghanistan. And again, when you talk about the strategic kind of a commitment between China and Iran, do you think the Indian influence in Iran even is going to go further down? Your comment on that, Amina?
Okay. Just before that, can I just add 2 points on what was just said about, the Taliban and the reduction of violence? I just want to say one thing. I think the Americans have a very important role to play when it comes to the reduction of violence. Rightly said, the agreement does say that there will be a reduction in violence, and it does say that it has to push for a ceasefire. However, here is where now the US's role is contradictory. The fact that the Taliban have reduced or stopped attacking international forces has led, in fact, Secretary Pompeo to, in fact, give a statement in March where he said that the Taliban were keeping their end of the bargain. Now, this is highly, contradictory because they're not keeping the end of the bargain. Just because they're not attacking American forces does not mean they've, halted their violence. And another thing, somebody mentioned that the Americans are interested in withdrawing. I don't think that's the case because if you see what the statements coming from the Taliban, while the Taliban have always emphasized the withdrawal of foreign forces, at the same time, remember, the group has categorically stated several times in the Moscow peace process in 2018 and 17 that they would be open to the US coming back for development and reconstruction. So this clearly indicates that they might be open to some sort of US presence in Afghanistan. And I think this is something very important that is often overlooked. While we in this part of the world, particularly Pakistan, feel that the Americans are in a rush to leave, believe me, they're not. Coming to the Indian presence, I'll just say, the Indian influence in Afghanistan, I think they're being very careful. Over the past couple of months, there has been somewhat of a development between the Taliban as well as the Indians, because the Indians have been giving statements where they have said that they're watching the developments very closely. And
but the spokesperson of the Taliban, I remember about a month ago, or maybe a little more than that, said that the Indians have always betrayed them, you can't trust them, and there is a lot of problem regarding them. So despite that statement, do you think they're still moving ahead?
Yes, of course, because look, at the end of the day, the Taliban are very pragmatic. Remember, the Taliban, it took the Russians to bring the Afghans to the negotiating table, including the Taliban. Remember, they made their first public appearance and first public speech in Moscow. So if they can, open up to Moscow, the same country that invaded them, or similarly Iran that they've had, strained relationships with, why not with the Indians? Right. So I think the Taliban are being pragmatic. I'm not saying they're going to completely put all their eggs in the Indian basket, but they are open because at the end of the day, India has, the kind of inroads India has made in Afghanistan is tremendous over the past, 18 years. So I think that the Taliban are now more pragmatic. While they'll keep their alliances, but I don't think they're going to shy away from opening new relationships, and that too with the Indians.
So, well, I mean, obviously things can change, interests can change, reality can change to a certain extent. Now, Suhrawardy Saab, we have heard certain good news also that Abdullah, after meeting Mr. Sadiq, he has also agreed to visit Pakistan. I put that first question to, in fact, I put it to Amina. But now my point is, sir, that this seems to be a good CBM, a part of that. And secondly, if Abdullah visits Pakistan and he goes back with some sort of a satisfactory level, some satisfaction in his mind regarding the overall approach of the Pakistani military or the government for that matter, because currently everybody is on the same page. you believe that in the coming, I mean, because currently the corona has taken over the whole world, everything seems to be at a standstill. But once this menace is over, let's suppose by the end of this year or so, do you believe that the process would also get a proper jump start? Things would be pretty much sorted out to a certain level? Or you believe that things would remain the same, the situation inside Afghanistan is going to remain fluid, a lot is going to happen, but nothing in the right direction? There are two separate approaches. What do you see?
Rahman, I believe to answer your question, I believe the most important thing at the moment is the trust deficit between Pakistan and Dr. Abdullah, individually speaking. Dr. Abdullah is leading a percentage of population of Afghanistan that doesn't believe in Pakistan. They don't trust Pakistan. In the last term, when he was chief executive, he couldn't visit Pakistan, and the reason was there were gaps between the two. It was Dr. Ashraf Ghani who was visiting Pakistan, and some kind of relationship was developing. If Dr. Abdullah comes over to Pakistan, I believe Pakistani administration is also ready to give him a very positive gesture, so that Dr. Abdullah and Dr. Ghani, they may get they get cemented with each other, and they may go for a positive gesture for Pakistan, not only for the peace process, but also for the success of it and developing and cultivating very positive relations between the two countries. Situation is such that whenever there is a unity government in Afghanistan, one faction is there to negotiate with Pakistan, and the other faction is completely blank towards Pakistan. They don't even talk to Pakistan. They don't even consider Pakistan worthy of being talked. At the same time, the other part is accommodating India more. So I believe this is Ambassador Sadiq's success, that he spoke with him and he convinced him to to start his major marathon visit of different countries, which includes India at the same time, Doha and different other neighboring countries, to start from Pakistan. He comes over to Pakistan. Of course, there would be, as you mentioned, it would be a CBM from both sides. And if it is
Ashraf Ghani, when he took charge in his previous government, also visited Pakistan, and see where it led after 4, 5, 6 years. There is a complete disengagement.
Sorry, once again.
Ashraf Ghani, when he was elected the president for the first time in the previous government, his first visit again, where was it? Here? But the trust deficit remained there, sir. Rather, things got from bad to worse.
Rahman, I agree with you. You are right. Now, my contention is that somehow out of two parties, one was one was annoyed from Pakistan. Now, with this new government, that annoyed party is visiting Pakistan, which is something really very positive. I believe that this would be what I stated in my last statement, that it will be reciprocated very positively, and I'm pinning very high hopes with what is coming out from this National Reconciliation Committee and its way forward.
Now, AVM Saab, when we talk about the reconciliation now, because intra-Afghan dialogue is something very important. There are so many members who have got totally opposite opinions, but still at least something can be done. How important is this engagement of the Afghan Taliban and the government, and then the Afghan Taliban government and the Americans is concerned, in order to make that intra-Afghan dialogue a success story, or at least bring it to that level where there could be a bit of kind of a happy situation for all?
Faisal, the Doha Agreement, it gave legitimacy to Taliban. It accepted them as a legal party to the conflict, and there was also a secret annexure in which it was agreed that the sanctions against Taliban would be lifted. So they have a legal position, and they would be more than happy to enter dialogue with the Afghan government. They would come to the table. They would not be tough negotiators, but they would definitely come. Now, what is at stake? I've probably said in one of the earlier programs also that you have in the present government, one half is with Mr. Ashraf Ghani, one half is Mr. Abdullah, and third party to enter the fray in the political pie would be Taliban. Who would be ready to accede to the Taliban's demands of having a major hand in the government. That is the actual moot point. When when Taliban sit down with with the Afghan government, they're not going to negotiate for just 1/3 part of the positions in the cabinet and 1/3 part positions in the. Actually, they would like the entire Taliban forces to be merged in the Afghan National Security Forces, because that is has been their demand, that the Taliban would become part of the national forces. So would that be acceptable to the other party? So there are major concerns, major I would say roadblocks that both the parties will have to overcome to make a government which probably would be a coalition government. I hope there's a coalition government, but let's not expect very quick results. The talks between Afghanistan, Afghans and Taliban are also Afghans, the Afghan government and Taliban is going to be a very tough one. And during this negotiation period, which is going to drag, the more it drags, the greater pressure will be on the Afghan government, because Taliban would be under no compulsion. They would be on the offensive outside in the battlefield. So the pressure would be on the Afghan government. And the Afghan government, you might recall, in 1990s, the Afghan national forces, they just disintegrated in front of Taliban. And this time again, what you see is a weakening national forces that may not be able to withstand in all places the pressure that Taliban would bring down on them. So I see a very tough time, and probably my thought for Pakistan would be that Pakistan should not become a guarantor of any sort of any success of the talks or implementation of those agreements that may take place. You mentioned about India and Iran. I think India is not going to let Afghanistan go away. If nothing else, probably they would try to maintain their hold so that they can keep the pressure on our Balochistan borders and our Fatah borders, former Fatah borders.
All right.
They will maintain their presence. Iran is not going to change their stance after they enter into agreement, which is yet to be ratified by their parliament with China. That's going to take some time. So I don't think Iran will change their relationship with India. They didn't change earlier also, so their relationship with India will continue. The Indian position in Afghanistan may fade out, but they will continue to remain and continue to be active as spoilers.
I'm sure this is exactly what they have in their mind. And you also mentioned about the power sharing. Amina, now over to you. And that is something important in a way that twice, which we have witnessed in our during the last maybe 6-7 years. Once the president was elected, then we got to know that John Kerry visited Afghanistan, and then Abdullah Abdullah was made the CEO. Then again now there was this problem regarding the election. Both the candidates were claiming their victory. Again, President Ashraf Ghani claimed the win, and Abdullah Abdullah was given the Supreme National Reconciliation Council as part of the power sharing deal, and he was appointed the chairman of this. Now again the power sharing deal, but I mean, if these two issues could be sorted out, why not Afghanistan could have like 3 different major players, some from the Taliban side, some from Ashraf Ghani's group, maybe some from the government side. There could be a settlement, but the Americans believe that they will withdraw their forces, no more funding for the Afghan government, not even for the sake of the payments of their soldiers and all. They can't survive, they don't have an economy. So that vacuum that is going to, or that void that is going to be there if the Americans leave, or even they leave a certain amount of forces and stop the Afghan funding for that matter, where do you see this entire episode heading then?
Okay, so let me just begin by just saying that, you know, a lot of important issues that were overlooked, critical aspects that are essential for peace that were overlooked in the US-Taliban deal now need to be chalked out in the upcoming intra-Afghan talks, and we're assuming they do take place. Now, let me just begin by saying that the first most important aspect will be troop withdrawal, but this should only happen once some sort of, progress has been made on the future what is the future political setup going to be in Afghanistan? Till date, little or no discussion, let alone progress, has been made on what future political setup will there be. Will it be, for example, the continuation of the current setup and then you accommodate the Taliban? Or will it be something that, again, I refer to the Moscow talks, where all the different political factions, Afghan political factions, including the Taliban, agreed on an interim political setup? But again, President Ghani was the only one who opposed that. So again, it is essential that before the Americans decide to withdraw or reduce their troops or whatever, the intra-Afghan talks can only succeed once we know what kind of a future political setup there is going to be. This is a very important question, and this is a mistake that was made when the agreement was signed with the Taliban, because this is one of the major things that should have been at least agreed upon. Apart from that, I think, again, the ceasefire, throughout the program, we've been talking about violence. And a ceasefire is essential. And let's be very honest, this is primarily from the Taliban side. They have to ensure a credible ceasefire and at least a reduction in violence, because,
Yes.
at the end of the day, it is the common man that dies in Afghanistan. And yes, while the Taliban may have gained ground and they continue to say they have support, this is an opportunity for the Taliban to present themselves in a new light as a major political stakeholder and through a non-violent means. And this is very doable. And this is something that has never been on the cards for the Taliban. So I think this is something they should take. And again, I think, please understand that, you see, the agreement, it took more than 18 months just for the agreement, including numerous hurdles, including a collapse. Remember when President Trump just declared the talks off. Now that an agreement has been signed, remember, this is just the beginning of a very long, a very complex and fragile process that will take time. It's a country that has been at war with itself and others for, decades. And this is something, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, the Afghans will have to sit with one another and they have to take ownership. They cannot put the onus again on different countries, including Pakistan. Pakistan can only do so much. And I agree with AVM Saab that, you see, Pakistan should support the peace process, but it should be limited to peace. Let the Afghans sort the issue out themselves. I know it's easier said than done, and there's going to be numerous hurdles, but unfortunately, this is the price that they have to pay. And let's be very honest, this is the only option they have. It is better than war.
Let's see.
Call it for all the problems and all the, it's not a complete deal in any sense of the word, but it's the lesser evil and the best option they have.
All right. Last quick comment from you, Sarwardi Saab. Now, earlier I was talking about this financial aid of the Americans, which means a lot for the Afghan people, for the Afghan government. They can't function without that. I remember when initially there was this problem regarding the release of the Taliban prisoners as well as the prisoners from the government side. There was Taliban was supposed to release 1,000, the government was supposed to release 5,000, and then maybe the exact person wasn't released or the exact number of people wasn't released. There was this problem. I remember that was the President Ashraf Ghani's statement that we all read, and that said that we won't be doing that and there is no negotiation on that part. But later on we got to know that because of the American pressure exerted on the Afghan government, and they said that we will not give you any assistance if you do not release the prisoners, then the President of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, was under pressure and he had to do it. So Americans have that kind of a role. I mean, let's not say it's Afghan-owned, Afghan-led. It is very much American-owned and American-led as well. Your take, last quick comment from you, Sarwardi Saab, and then AVM Saab from you.
First of all, the total amount of Afghan economy is $6 billion, whereas total spending on Afghan national forces, which means army as well as police, is $4.2 billion. So if Mike Pompeo threatens to reduce $1 billion, of course, it would be from the army side. And you know that army is at the moment is struggling to fight with the Taliban. And that would have been a big gamble had Dr. Ashraf Ghani proceeded with that. Thanks, they both, Dr. Abdullah and Dr. Ashraf Ghani, mended fences, and they are closer now with each other, which means that threat has worked. Number one. Number two important thing is that the more they are closer to each other, the better they would be. Rahman, in our last 1 hour conversation, more or less 1 hour conversation, we are missing one very important point, and that is that when we say intra-Afghan dialogue, it would not be only the Kabul regime and the Taliban. There would be many other factions who would be there in negotiation process, and they would be negotiating. I believe if we are going to talk about the future setup of Afghan government, we are jumping to the conclusion. This intra-Afghan dialogue is going to take I don't know really, like I can say years, because remember Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland, it took years and years to reach
Oh,
to
yes,
a common
indeed,
point.
indeed.
It still will be the case with them. Yes, Iman.
All right. Over to you, AVM Saab. Quick comment from you, sir, before I wrap up.
Dates to watch. One, first date is 20th November 2020, when the U.S. elections will take place. Depends who wins. If there are Democrats, would there be a change of mind, change of strategy? Would there be Mr. Trump back, and how would he continue to support? So that's a date to watch. Second date to watch is April 2021, when under the agreement, the Americans are supposed to complete their withdrawal of forces from Afghanistan. So would Taliban be bound by any other force? You see, what happens is that in this particular peace process, the Americans have a leverage over the Afghan government in terms of their financial aid. But nobody else, Pakistan or any Islamic country, has that kind of a leverage on Taliban to keep them glued to the negotiating table. So the important date would be April 2021. If the American forces have withdrawn by that time, and Taliban continue to show their willingness, and maybe negotiate a ceasefire before that, that would be a very, very positive step. So probably next step would be before the Americans leave. I foresee a more kind of a concerted effort to achieve a ceasefire between the two parties, and that should happen before.
All right. All right. Thank you very much, AVM Saab. Thank you very much, Ms. Amina, and thank you very much, Surwadi Saab, for your comments and for your details in this show. And that's all we have for this. I'll see you inshallah tomorrow at 8. Till then, you take good care of yourself. Khuda Hafiz from our side.